Hey everybody, and welcome to the Everything Went Black podcast. Please welcome my good friend Kyle Laurel. He's a longtime metal fan. If you live in Brooklyn and you check out all the shows at St. Vitus or any of the other venues in the area, you'll see Kyle at the show. Seen him for years. He's been on the podcast once before. Very interesting guy. He's a spoken word artist and very active in the suspension subculture. Now, there's been a lot of crazy stuff going on in the press. There's been a lot of borderline yellow journalism running rampant in the extreme music scene these days. And Kyle and I just wanted to kind of talk about that, talk freely, talk about speaking freely and speaking our minds, and just sort of getting all that stuff out there to everybody. And neither one of us are experts on anything. Some of you may not even agree with what we say, but I just wanted to open up this forum for discussion. And similar to the Antifa episode I did a little while ago, once again, please feel free to comment and send me messages. And even if you disagree, I'd like to hear what you have to say, because that's the last thing I want to do is suppress anyone's freedom to speak their mind. Before we get going, I just want to direct you to On It. Head over to everythingwentblackmedia.com. If you're into healthy living, exercise, click on the portal, and that's a way for me to wet my beak a little bit, keep the lights on around here. Also, you can support the podcast by checking out our Patreon. It's on the Facebook page. It's pinned at the top. If you go to Everything Went Black Media, a pop-up shows up, and you can support the podcast for as little as $1 a month. If you can't do that, I would appreciate any sort of word of mouth to your friends. If you enjoy the podcast and you want to turn people onto that, that'd be great. Giving us likes on Facebook, checking out the Instagram, which I've changed that to everythingwentblack_Mike Hill. That's the Instagram officially for this podcast, as well as some of the ridiculous things I get into in my life. You'll see on there too. And some new platforms that you can listen to us on. We're on Google Play, Spotify, as well as the mainstays of iTunes, streaming at the site, Stitcher, and on YouTube. And if you don't want to miss an episode, please subscribe via iTunes.
When it comes to capitalism, I think people want more fairness, they want more balance, they want more just consideration for their plights and their troubles or whatever it is that they think that needs improvement in society.
Right.
And I'm all for that.
Sure.
I'm all for that. But what I think, and this is just, let me preference everything that I say on here. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying my best not to make a fool of myself, because I assume that half of the things I say are probably a little ill-informed to a lot of ill-informed.
Well, dude, none of us
trying
are.
to have my own opinion.
Yeah, none of us are like sociology.
And this is the point of these conversations, so that we can bounce their ideas off of each other and get feedback.
None of us are experts on this.
And then just sort of clarify. So I'm just talking. It seems to me that in an effort for more fairness and more inclusion and more, everything that would be better and good for society, with all the problems with capitalism, it's how do I say this? Out of all the socioeconomic systems that have been tried in the past, by no means is capitalism, working ideally as it could. But compared to everything else, I think it's the least genocidal. I'll put it that way. It's the least genocidal, and it's the least murderous at best, compared to all the other systems that have been tried, whether it's Marxism or communism or whatever other socioeconomic systems that have been attempted in the past. Just looking at, empirical evidence of statistics and body counts, you know what I mean, over the last 100, 150 years, capitalism seems to be the least murderous and genocidal. Now, it needs lots of improvement.
Yeah, because some of the problems with capitalism is in theory, just like a lot of these systems, it's good. Competition's good.
Yeah.
As far as like getting a fair price and quality products, all that
Right.
stuff. That's a good thing.
But then human nature tends to corrupt.
Exactly.
Any good that's already happening, at some point, human nature is going to corrupt it, and a lot of people are going to get crushed under the spoke of that wheel.
Yeah,
so to speak.
Exactly, and that's really what the problem with capitalism is that after a while it's like the bottom line becomes like the goal as opposed to it's not necessarily
over humane treatment.
Yeah, it's not necessarily like a community based. It turns into this thing where it's not like community and human based like sort of system.
Well, here's the thing that I've sort of been looking into more and more though, but it seems, and again, this is just something I've been fairly recently learning and studying about in the past 6 months. Capitalism or inequality, let's say inequality, has been a much bigger problem in nature in the course of human history. You know what I mean? Whether it's human beings or the way stars are formed in the galaxy or the way trees grow in the forest. Inequality in nature, in the universe as a whole, has been a much bigger dilemma or a much bigger thing that you could look at way before, modern civilization or Western civilization implemented widespread capitalism.
Okay.
So I think, in the sense, when you lay all the ills that are troubling, society, like Western civilization society, when you lay all those ills at the feet of capitalism, I don't think you're looking deep enough at what we really should be studying and looking into. You know what I mean? To get to the bottom of the root of what's causing that inequality. Same thing with like hierarchies to an extent.
Okay.
In nature itself, hierarchies exist in every form of nature that you can look at, whether it's animals or human beings. And when you talk about like hierarchies, whether it's like male dominance or competence dominance, I think when you start to place the blame on the simplest thing that you can look at as the root cause of something like that, I think you're leaving out a lot of what else could be contributing to that, maybe more so than the most obvious thing.
Well, that's the big issue, I think, with today in general, the last several years, is just this kind of literal, total lack of subtlety that people use when they analyze some of the problems that we're having. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's not just an absolute yes or no. Everything is like this kind of gray area, almost like a case-by-case thing.
Yeah.
And then you look at statistically where all these things like intersect, and that becomes like okay, that's the path. You know what I mean? It's not just like yes or no. Like it's just there's so much subtlety in every situation that you have to. But as humans, because we like to instinctually data chunk everything, we use pattern recognition. So it's like, all right, it has. Out of like these 7 variables, 5 of those variables are checked off, so it's this thing.
Yeah.
Instead of going the other mile and being like, okay, these other overtones actually inform this whole thing.
Yeah.
And then we just simplify everything down. And
that's try to pick the most obvious thing, and that's reasonable. I understand why we do that.
But that's where we get, we get stuck on those things, especially as our society becomes more and more complex.
Right.
The simplistic data chunking of when we're like running through the woods trying to escape from, predators or bring down bison. In a simpler world, that data chunking works.
Right.
But then once you start having all this complexity in the society, that instinct sort of has to be enhanced, and it has to be updated. And we're not, because we're still the same hominids that existed out, physiologically, the whole thing. We're not really meant to be in this society, so we have to really focus on expanding our skill set and adding some subtlety in the way we take data in. But I think
the way we personally assess things.
Exactly.
And try to, for anything that I say or think, and this is why I've been trying to interact with people more, either in person or on social media. The only way I have of checking my biases is to throw out my thought, assume, okay, this is how I feel as a gut feeling, but it may be ignorant. Let me throw it out there and see what kind of feedback I get from other people that I really respect. Like Carlin, our
okay.
mutual friend
Yep.
Carlin, there was a thing where, okay, so college campuses around, the U.S. and Europe and Canada and other places, there's been a thing where I consider myself like a left-leaning liberal.
Sure.
You know
Me
what I
too.
mean? I'm all about like openness
Mm-hmm.
and freedom of speech and those kind of things. And I try to have some nuance of how I divide what I consider very disagreeable speech or repugnant speech that I don't like, as opposed to what hate speech is.
Okay.
And I
yeah.
think that over time, as time goes on, especially in like recent years, the line between what people will classify as hate speech, as opposed to very disagreeable speech,
Yeah.
is
yeah.
getting more blurred and blurred. And I try to draw the line at, like, for me, unless you're advocating for something like violent and inhumane to happen to me, like, I don't really consider that hate speech. And also the whole thing of like violent speech, dude. It's like, no matter how strongly I disagree with you, unless you're overtly saying you want something to happen to me, I don't
Yeah.
really consider speech violent. Because I grew up at a time in the world, and especially in New York City, where violence wasn't violence until you were getting punched in the face,
Sure.
or someone was putting their hands on you.
Exactly.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I understand people's feelings getting hurt,
Yeah.
and I'm feeling like there's a big difference between insult and assault.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that line has been getting terribly blurred based on people's emotional gut reactions. So I put up a post about how, different right-wing speakers who I vehemently disagree with.
Sure.
Right? Like
Yeah.
Ann Coulter,
Yep. Totally.
for instance. They've been getting disinvited, and they've been, being not allowed to speak at like certain universities that they've either been to already in the past or that they're being invited to, in the first place. And okay, I don't agree with almost anything Ann Coulter has to say.
Absolutely not.
9.9 out of 10 things that she has to say, I don't agree with at all. But do I think she's the same as Richard Spencer? Not exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Richard Spencer is part of that underground of white nationalism.
Yeah, it's white nationalism masquerading.
Right.
You know
it's
what
like
I mean?
a cleaned up version of it that's has a more commercial appeal to it.
Right.
But it's still the same thing.
And even right. So I don't agree with Ann Coulter, but I think she should be allowed to speak if she's invited to a university.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that got a lot of backlash, and I went back and forth with some of my friends who, like, I really respect and I value their opinions. And it wasn't until later on in the thread where Carlin chimed in, and she made a really good point that I hadn't considered, which was when it comes to, like, universities and people that, like, pay tuition and the kids that go to these schools, their tuition money is funding, the room and board and the travel and that invitation.
Yeah.
So up until she said that, I was like, dude, if people want to speak at universities, let them speak, as long as they're not advocating for people to be strung up on trees.
Yeah, if they're like organizing some kind of like, all right, we're recruiting for this like hate group.
Yeah.
And our agenda is the annihilation of whatever
group.
Yeah.
No, that's not cool.
That's like a militaristic sort of like,
take
like
on
recruitment thing. But if someone's expressing unpopular beliefs, then I mean, you're going to get an education at a university, and if you're studying like the Roman Empire or something like that, you're going to have some, darker aspects of that, as well as all the great engineering things they did with.
And I think it's important to let those people speak to an extent.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that outward public discourse, even if it's I don't think there's anything I or you could say that's going to change Ann Coulter's mind.
No.
But at least the people who feel like her, they see their opinion getting out there through her as a vessel. And I think that keeps them a little bit more civilized.
Yeah.
Because when you don't allow that rhetoric to get out there at all, or to have a platform, you know what I mean, in some sort of mainstream sort of way, it just forces it underground, and then it really becomes like poisonous and dangerous.
Well, two things actually with that. One was what you just said, when it becomes like this underground sort of thing, and then it becomes like having like some
secretive and
clandestine operation, and then people are society, like disenfranchised youth are probably they're enamored with that sort of secret world,
right?
So they turn to that. So that makes it more attractive to
makes it more attractive, and then also like you don't know who has those ideas. I think by letting someone like that get out there and speak, and all the people that get behind her or whoever, then you get to see, okay, that one, all think like this thing.
Exactly.
And then we're aware of who they are, and they're aware of who we are, and we can try to talk to them. But if you make it all just go away, then we don't even know, you know what I mean?
It's underground.
Then we don't know who thinks what, and we're not able to identify.
And the other thing, too, and this is like a little bit more subtle, is like when you're telling someone they can't show up and do something, like, for example, we're using Ann Coulter here. If, like, the young liberals at this college, no Ann Coulter.
Can't have it.
Okay, can't have her.
Yeah.
So then you become, like the left, that young liberal person, that group becomes the suppressor.
Right.
You know what I mean? As opposed to, sure, man, everyone has their they can express their opinions and they are free to speak. And then you suddenly become the censor of everything.
And that's the thing. It's like I've been seeing more and more of this on the left, and I'm not. I have varying opinions on different things. Some things I lean a little bit more on the right about. Most things I lean to the left about. But as a, considering myself like an open-minded liberal, when I see my own, camp, so to speak, start to exhibit more and more of the behavior of the other side that I don't agree with, I feel like I almost have more of a responsibility to speak up about that than I do to even oppose the other side. It's sort of like almost like get your own house in order to a certain extent. Like, how are we going to fight the good fight when you're starting to do things that I disagree with the same as the other side? I want us to, you know what I mean?
It becomes hypocritical.
It becomes hypocritical.
Yeah, right.
So, recently when I've been speaking out about more and more of these things that I see, like radical leftist ideology, when I speak about those things, people, they've gotten confused about where I stand on issues. And it's like, no, I stand where I always stand. But it's like when I see my own, I hate to say the word camp or side, because these things are a little bit more complex than saying I'm on the left or the right for everything. When I see people that I think of myself as mostly having things in common with, when I see them start to do it, it's kind of like, I kind of want to check it to a certain extent. You know what I mean? Just to kind of keep things.
Another thing that's interesting to me too is like the back in the 80s, there was Howard Stern and the hustler guy Larry Flint, and this is like this one's out there, that Max Hardcore guy. I don't think anyone. I hope no one is into that extreme. Hey, whatever you're into, but that was like a real test of free speech in a lot of ways.
Right.
You know what I mean? So the left wing, the liberals, were the ones who were coming to champion these causes of free speech, And in this case, it was actually a free speech situation where there was legislation. The government was trying to suppress your free speech, So that's a true free speech situation, to keep the government in check and allowing you to freely express yourself. So, the liberals came to these defenses of Howard Stern, and, we don't like what you say, but
what you do,
do, but you have the right to do those things. Right. Same thing with you, Larry Flint, and the same thing.
Like Dee Snider,
Twisted Sister,
who made he stepped up to the plate back in the day. To defend metal.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And to his credit, he did it very well.
Yeah.
And different organizations, whether they were the
PMRC,
right? That these different organizations that wouldn't normally come near Dee Snider with a 10-foot stick had to step up to the plate and go, you know what? Like, we don't like what your content is, but we agree with, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That you should be able to have it and put it out there.
Yeah.
I think over time, that's getting more and more blurred and getting more and more pushback from, I think, the people who should be defending it.
And another example back in the historical past of the 80s and early 90s is like, gangster rap was like a big, NWA, the fantasy world of violence and, sexism and all this other sort of misogynistic, fantasy world that these guys had in their music. And, I have all the records, you know what I mean?
Well, that's the weird thing also when it comes to this whole, like, separating art from the individual to a certain extent. I think with any sort of creativity, whether it's like gangster rap or whether it's, black metal or whether...
Or Max Hardcore.
Or Max
actually,
Hardcore.
In that case, I think the separation's not
right,
there.
Yeah. I think you have to suspend a little disbelief to let people, unless they're overtly saying this, and that. And if they're not overtly saying it, even if they're starting to tread the line a little bit too much for close to comfort,
sure,
you got to check it. But I think for the most part, you have to be able to give people the freedom of expression without condemning them just because you don't agree with whatever their perspective or their expression is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So now, like 30 years later,
right,
we have not necessarily the government going after people to regulate what they're saying or how they're expressing themselves. We actually have the full circle of the liberals.
Now the people
who used to be the champion of free speech are now telling people because they're expressing something which is opposite to how they might feel that they can no longer express themselves that way.
Right. So now that we're on this part of it, I'd kind of like to address some of the things that have been going on with within our circle of like black metal, and all that stuff. A couple of things. So I want to touch on Inquisition and Dagon, and I want to touch on Young and in the Way.
Okay, I don't know much about Young. Oh wait, it was a sexual misconduct thing with them?
Well, even before that.
Okay,
we can touch on that, but before that, I remember I've seen them like 2 or 3 times in recent years.
Sure.
First time I saw them, I was like, oh, this is dope. I like it. Bought, a T-shirt or whatever. And then they ended up coming to play at Vitus. And I remember standing in the merch line with John from Sonhet. And then we looked up, and one of their T-shirts had like a skull with like 2 lightning bolts, through it. And it said like something about the true enemy. And me and him both looked at each other, and we're like, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? You know what I mean? Like, and again, it's like, I think a lot of black metal bands, or even like in the industrial scene, people like flirting with the whole notion of like Nazism. And okay, some of them, do I think they're actually like Nazis and they're a part of like, some of them, I'm more inclined to go, yeah, probably, maybe.
Like Blood Axis or something like that.
Or others, I'm going, so I think they're trying to be, like, cute. Like, what was the band that just got, they had their whole tour shut down?
Oh, well, okay, this is happening. Taka.
Taka, right.
Yeah.
So, this ties in with Young and in the Way.
I think they're on tour together, actually. Weren't they?
Are they now?
No.
I think that was a meme.
Back in the day.
I think
they did tour together.
That's ironic.
Possibly.
So, okay, so with the merch thing, me and John are sitting there going, I don't know if he wants his name mentioned, but I don't think I'm saying anything bad or whatever. But anyhow, we're standing there going, well, what do they mean by that?
Yeah.
And to me, I'm looking at it going, oh, they're doing that thing where they're flirting with the line, maybe. Maybe they aren't that, and maybe they don't actually endorse that, but maybe they think they're being a little cute, or maybe they think, they weren't paying attention. But I don't think it's like, dude, if you play black metal, you have to be aware of what throwing 2 fucking lightning bolts between a skull is going to look like to any guy that just walks up to the merch. You know what I mean? I think you're being a little purposely provocative.
Yeah.
And if you're not being purposely provocative, you're at least being a little unaware of how that might come off to other people.
Yeah, and
maybe you care, maybe you don't care.
Yeah.
Right? That's fine.
But you have to be given the opportunity to debate your side of it.
Though. Yeah, and also to explain yourself.
Exactly.
Right, and once you clarify, cool, if that's what you say it is, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. That's my whole thing in life. I try to go through life giving people the benefit of the doubt first before I, like, jump to condemning them on some, well, what the fuck, this is what I want to think, regardless of what you say. All right? Which I think is a huge problem. So, the Young and in the Way thing, when we saw that shirt and that logo, I was like, that's kind of weird. like, whatever, like, and then I looked online, and they had kind of addressed it. That,
what was their response? I don't know.
Oh, we're not that, and it was just sort of, it was a little vague, but it was enough that I'm going, well, they addressed it, and they kind of, they basically said we're not a Nazi band, and we don't, fuck with that shit or whatever. So I was like, all right, fine, benefit of the doubt, moving on. Wasn't pleased, but
yeah, some of the things
whatever.
about that though is I remember, I lived in Boston for a number of years in the 90s, so in that, there's a lot of some wild shit happened in that city during the 90s, and
there's always been wild shit happening in Boston,
especially in the 80s and the 90s. Though there were Nazi skinheads in the late 80s, and into the 90s they were there, but not so much as prevalent as in the late 80s. But if you were like represented yourself as a Nazi, and you weren't part of that group of skinheads, they would beat your ass.
Yeah.
As well as the guys on the other side.
It was almost like gang rules.
It was definitely gang.
Like you can't.
It was make no mistake about it. It
gangs.
was gang rules.
Yeah.
It was gangster
right,
shit.
Prison shit. Like,
totally.
To an extent, where like don't fly these colors if you're not going to be about it.
Right.
To a certain extent, don't even look the part.
Yeah, man.
Unless you're willing to take ownership and fucking deal with like the real consequences.
Now that mentality, I back that idea because
even on the other side, that I'm like, oh, you guys are fucking pigs, but at least you're about it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? At least you like put it out there.
But I do think that if you're not, if you don't have that ideology, you shouldn't. It's very irresponsible.
Irresponsible. Yeah.
Now, once again,
and it's unnecessarily provocative. Most people don't realize that Antifa, there's no like central leadership or guidelines or like code of conduct. It's sort of like, it's a banner.
Right.
But it's not really an organization. It's a banner that all these loose-knit cells and sections all kind of function under their own accord. And, some of them I think are trying to fight the good fight for the right reasons. And then you have other facets of it that are just, they're almost more anarchist than they are freedom fighters. And they're very overzealous, and they're very quick to make accusations. And like the thing with Taco, with their previous tour before the one that just got shut down, they fucking let off a smoke bomb in some venue on the West Coast, which, like, dude, when you do that, it's like, I don't give a fuck what your point is. You're completely, you know what I mean?
You're endangering people's well-being.
Innocent people. Even if you don't agree that, like, maybe they don't know whatever your gripe is about, decay or whatever, you can't let off a fucking smoke bomb in the middle of a venue. You're defeating your own point, and you're creating more, enemies and allies, and you're just defeating your own purpose, right? So there's that. And I think because of the backlash that they got from that, it kind of stuck in their craw, and they made a point to continue their agenda against decay. So the only problem is that you mentioned before, they have some of the shit that they spew is propagandist.
Yeah,
to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's incorrect, because like certain bands that they flagged as being, Nazi related or whatever, like Whoa, they're not.
Wait, hold on a second. Whoa was way.
Oh, yeah.
National Socialist
they
black
were,
metal.
yeah, they've had shows and like little mini tours that they were going to do in Europe. They got flagged by Antifa. Can you, like, those dudes?
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Huh.
Like, what do you, like, they're wrong.
That's insane.
They're wrong. You know what I mean? About, like, several other groups. They've been wrong about. So, again, they're defeating their own purpose in that aspect. But the thing about the most recent thing with the decay is that there was actually, there was fire to that smoke.
Yeah,
because there was a picture, and it was 10 years ago, where the dude came out, you know what I mean, wearing a fucking swastika at some show in Germany, which he made a point to do.
And it's illegal to do that in Germany.
It's illegal to do there. Yeah. And he made a point to do it there. And I understand, it's 10 years ago, whatever. You thought you were being, extreme or outrageous or inflammatory, whatever the fuck you think you were doing. Do I think that guy is necessarily like a full-blown Nazi? Not. Maybe not. Probably not. Right? But like a lot of black metal bands, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. I assume, like most, industrial bands or a lot of black metal bands, they like flirting with some of the,
Yeah, I mean, even
with the insignia and the vibe,
Yeah,
but
even,
they may not necessarily be full-blown, and fighters for the Nazi cause. Or
yeah, even the Sex Pistols and back in the 80s.
All that bullshit.
Yeah,
right. So with Decay, there is that photo of him, right? And here's the thing. They did that 10 years ago, and they were able to go on with their careers in Europe, and they were able to do their first couple of tours here without any incident or without any outcry. But once that photo really started to circulate recently, a lot of and again, there was a little bit of fire to that smoke. And even though it was 10 years ago, it's like one of my friends told me when we were talking about it amongst ourselves, it's like, dude, if you're going to act like a troll, you know what I mean? You got to expect to deal with the fucking troll consequences.
No, I agree with that.
You know what I mean? So it's like, do I agree with Antifa as far as how they've gone about the whole thing with that band? No. But am I at all sympathetic to the extent that Take feels that they got fucked out of a tour? Not really, because you kind of getting what was coming to you. Whether it was 10 years ago, whether it was 5 years ago.
Well, all right. Now this brings up an interesting.
Like, you fucked up.
This brings up an interesting thing.
Yeah.
It's like, do I think that Taka are Nazis? No. Do I think that the singer thinks he's Gigi Allen or something like that? Yes.
Yeah.
Now, the problem I have with this whole thing is this kind of like McCarthyist, like backstabbing way in which this information gets released to people. Like, obviously, this happened 10 years ago.
Right.
I mean, 10 years ago, I was a different person. I don't think I would do some of the things I did 10 years ago.
Right.
But no one wanted to have a conversation about it. They just wanted to
shut it down and make it go away. Shut it down and make it go away.
And make these accusations about people that may or may not be true or false.
Also, with that guy, the singer, when it happened, and also like a few years following, he had released a couple of like public statements to address it.
Right.
And even in the public statements, he like told the club owner in Europe, he called him an Ubermensch, which, like, dude, if you're trying to make a public statement about not being a Nazi, it's probably not a good idea to call a club owner an Ubermensch and then tell him to go suck a Muslim. You know what I mean?
Probably.
Like, it's not a good idea to address the fact that you're not a Nazi. Even if I don't think you're necessarily a Nazi, you're saying and reflecting, we all know what an Ubermensch is. If you're up on that terminology, you're making a point to say some more provocative shit.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you fucked up there too, even in your explanation. So I don't really feel bad for that band.
No, I don't feel bad for the band, but what I do feel...
I feel bad about that the discussion gets shut down.
Yeah, I feel concerned that there's no discussion.
Discourse.
Yeah. And that's a common thing that happened, because actually when a number of years ago we were on tour with this Italian band called The Secret, right?
Okay,
over in Europe.
Yeah, I've seen those.
And then like the show in Nuremberg got canceled because Antifa said that the singer for The Secret, they have a photograph of him wearing a Burzum t-shirt. Okay.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So rather than contacting the band and being like, "What's up with your shirt?"
Yeah.
They just were like threaten.
What's that about? Do you want to clarify anything?
Threaten the promoter.
Yeah.
And then we ended up playing in some nowhere town in front of 10 people.
Right.
With The Secret.
Right.
And even Marco even tried to contact the promoter and be like, "Hey, let's put out some sort of press release."
Cool. That's not cool. And here's the thing: when it comes to Burzum, right? And I thought about Burzum and Varg in reference to Charles Manson.
Okay.
Because I think there's a bit of a connection when people talk about how do you separate art, and the individual and the politics, you know what I mean, from fascination and all that.
Sure.
Growing up, I was fascinated by Manson. You know what I mean? And like that whole thing and the whole vibe.
Me too.
Fascinated. Read the books. You know what I mean? Listened to the interviews.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Even the artwork, even his own music. I checked it out and I was like, wow, dude. You know what I mean? If he could have just stuck with his own creativity and with his charisma, this guy, he could have been a celebrity. He was rolling with the Beach Boys. Mm-hmm. He was on the path.
He auditioned to be in the Monkees too.
Yeah. He could have been something if he was able to curtail. It's like Hitler was also an accomplished painter,
right,
and an artist to some extent. And so to take notice of that person's expression or their art or what they could have become instead is to take notice of that and to be fascinated by it. I don't think is the same as endorsing the evils that they eventually ended up committing.
Well, because then you can also, start going after filmmakers who make films about World War II. You can go after like you can, just because you're interested in something or some dark historical figure, which at this stage of the game, Charles Manson is a part of Americana. Like he's an American.
The lexicon.
Yeah, he's part of our culture, and it's
he destroyed the hippie 60s.
Yeah.
He's the pinnacle of that at its peak, and what he was able to do, you know what I mean? He had 30 models on a school bus rolling around the country on acid.
Yeah. This is what's not interesting about that story.
Right, exactly. It could have become something, grand and amazing, and it turned out to be something awful and evil and terrible. So when it comes to Burzum, all right, or
Go back
Varg.
to Burzum and Varg, yeah.
When it comes to Varg and Burzum, I look at that and I go, wow, this dude, you may not like Burzum's music. I think it's interesting. I listen to those riffs and some of those songs, and I'm like, wow, I think the guy had talent.
I agree with that.
I think he had talent. The guy knew how to write a riff. He could play a bunch of different instruments.
He was an emperor.
Huh?
He played an emperor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think he knew how to, put together some songs. You know what I mean? Now, as far as what ended up becoming of Mayhem and that whole ordeal and what those guys ended up doing with a movement that could have, what that all escalated into, I'm not in agreement with, and I don't support. But that doesn't mean that, that doesn't devalue, I think, the efforts of the talent that guy possessed. But here's the other thing. For me, where I draw the line in my own personal life and my own consciousness, I can be interested and fascinated with something and, put a certain amount of attention and interest into it. But I draw the line at how I would potentially monetarily support it, or even project myself to be seen as if I'm endorsing it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So I have Burzum, I have Burzum music in my collection. I've listened to it. Occasionally I revisit it. You know what I mean? But would I buy a Burzum t-shirt? No. Because one, I don't want my money going to Varg. You know what I mean? Would I wear anything in public? No, because people could interpret it the wrong way, and I'm aware of the history of how people could misinterpret. Seeing me with a Burzum shirt, might come off.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, and this is kind of where I'm still on the edge, and I'm still trying to check myself of where I side on something like this. Manson, okay, of course I don't agree with, he eventually orchestrated, the slaughter of a pregnant woman, and, he wanted to start a race war.
Yeah, definitely.
And for anybody that doesn't know me, I'm black, you know what I mean? So, I'm definitely not about
that.
Yeah, I'm not about race wars.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? And his whole concept of what he thought the race war was going to be, it's batshit crazy, and I'm not about it. And so, but I have I Hate God shirts, or I have other merch like Uncle Acid.
Pictures of Manson on it.
I have pictures of Manson on it. And so, I own those things, and I bought them at a younger age. But as I get older and I start to analyze it, it's okay, I wouldn't necessarily wear a Burzum shirt, but people could look at me wearing a Manson shirt and make that same, unintended interpretation of why I'm wearing and what it represents. And I'm not so sure of where I draw the line on that. I think with Manson, especially on some of the I Hate God merch, it's their music is about, the turmoil, the chaos, the nihilism, all that shit, all the ills, and rotten things about society, and expressing, the scourge of trying to live as a civilized person with all those things swirling around in society. And what better image of that representation than Manson
Sure.
You know what I mean? So I get that. You know what I mean? Or like the Uncle Acid shirt that has him and Sharon Tate on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, if I look at that, I think, okay, that's clearly something that, like, that's a person. She was an actress, very beautiful, very, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Model, gorgeous woman.
Pregnant when she was
right, and there she is next to this dude who was very, very charismatic, had a bunch of women rolling with him that were just as, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, gorgeous.
Yeah,
and
Sharon Tate. Yeah.
Right. It all kind of like ties into like this weird representation of how something that could have been something, you know, for good, how it ends up contributing to something like evil and reprehensible. So that's how I kind of like rationalize it to an extent. I can wrap my head around the artwork of expressing that.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. We're talking about Mike Williams' artwork with I Hate God, because it very much references like that. It was, I think it was made popular by Brian Geisen, maybe, in like and even Burroughs, like in the late 70s, 60s, 80s or whatever. This sort of cut up method of
juxtaposition.
Yeah, just like that whole like collage cut up expression using like imagery that was existing and kind of creating your own narrative with it. You know,
right?
What I mean? And that's what Mike Williams does.
Yeah, that's what Mike Williams does. That's what, you know, a lot of bands that we listen to, they use like this sort of, you know, iconography that could be interpreted a lot of different ways. And I think if someone ever stops me on the street or says something, I've at least tried to have something ready to say.
But that's a good thing, man.
Yeah.
I think it's good to like, you know, like once again earlier
talk
on,
about
I said
things.
People they're fucking literal and they're like lacking any sense of subtlety. That the fact that you can say, oh no, actually it's about this. It's like these are the reasons why, and it makes sense, and there's logic.
Yeah, there's a context.
But when this whole movement of taking that activity out of the equation, it just fucking eradicates anything we've done as a culture to communicate. You know?
It's like when Mayhem played at Vitus. Here's the thing: I went to the show, and I actually you see me at Vitus sometimes. When the shows are sold out at Vitus, you know, I have a disability. For anybody who doesn't know me, I have CP, so I sit on the side of the stage in the corner, like on stage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when Burzum played, like
Mayhem.
When Mayhem played, thank you for correcting me. When Mayhem played, I sat on the side of the stage during their set, and I was a little conflicted about it. One, as someone who just knows the history of black metal, you got to give the devil his due. And I think that's the best way to describe, if you listen to black metal, you know what I mean? You have to know the history of that band, because everything that came after it, you know, whether it's, you know, Nazi black metal or, you know, whatever kind of black metal you listen to, you have to understand the history of that band to understand the context of where this music sort of came from and then where it went.
Right.
Until it got to you. So for me, you know, not that it was a nostalgic thing, but one, I'm familiar with you know, that album that they were playing and their music. I'm familiar with it. And to some extent, I don't know if I was doing this subconsciously or purposely, but it's like I'm almost sort of interested to see how they feel about, you know what I mean? Like a black guy sitting on the side of the stage while they're playing, knowing the history and the context of that band. And I didn't get a chance to, but I wanted to sort of try to speak to Hellhammer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like if anybody's read Lords of Chaos, he's had some interesting things to say about black and brown people in that book.
Yeah, out of all the guys in Mayhem,
he was the most like overt.
Yeah, definitely.
About like and like it was weird. There were a couple of times during the show where me and him sort of made eye contact briefly, and like he didn't seem displeased, but he almost just sort of seemed like almost oddly curious. You know what I mean? And I wish I would have had the opportunity, because I ended up talking to the guitar players after the show, and they were totally cool. You know what I mean? I didn't expect to like make friends with them, but I just kind of you know, as a black guy,
They want to see what their deal is.
I want to see what the deal is and see if there's any possibility for a rapport. You know what I mean? Or just how they come off.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know that. And so I went to the show, and there were a bunch of people who were pissed that they were even being allowed to play at Vitus.
Like sort of...
friends of mine.
Oh, yeah, friends of yours, okay.
Friends of mine.
Okay.
That, like, you know, just on social media, they'd express the fact that, like, oh, you know, Mayhem comes to play, and no one seems to care about their fucking anti-Semitic or their anti-this or that history. And I get that.
Sure.
That's a relevant feeling or opinion to have.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think they've been as problematic racially as some straight up Nazi skinhead bands? No, not necessarily. You know what I mean? Was I conflicted about being there? To an extent, but it's also fucking Mayhem. If I'm going to listen to black metal, I kind of feel like I kind of have to own up. And, like, if a band like that is playing there, like, I'm interested to see how that interaction could have potentially went to some extent.
That's really interesting, man. You know, and but the other point,
that's why I made a point to be there to some extent.
And what was your takeaway? Like, how do you?
I thought I thought they put on an incredible set.
Yeah.
And again, that's appreciating the art.
Right.
Outside of some of the politics, and also I also try to consider. And here's another thing: like, if you have a band, especially with bands, there may be 4 guys or 5 guys in a band. One dude could be questionable. You know what I mean? And to some extent, it's the other band member's responsibility to sort of address how that other member represents the whole. So to an extent, I was conflicted, and I'm still not resolved about my interest in attending the show. I can't necessarily say if I should have been there or I shouldn't have been there, but I was interested to be there, so I went. And if anybody wants to help me unpack that, if you see me at a show, if you want to hit me up online, like, I can be found. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not sure. I'm not hard to find. Ask around. You can get a hold of me whenever this is posted. Because I think which is why I'd liked having Elena Dowse in my life.
Oh, okay, yeah. She didn't like my Antifa episode, so
yeah.
And Lane has been on the podcast twice, actually.
Yeah,
she's a friend.
And again, like, okay, Lena put out a book a couple of years ago about, you know,
which I read the book.
Yeah,
we both read it.
I have it as well. Yeah, about, you know, black women's participation and struggles in heavy music. And me and her started to develop like a friendship, like outside of shows. And, you know, we would hang out and we would have these conversations either on Facebook or in person. And they were very challenging, which is, you know, I appreciated and I preferred because, you know, I have my own opinions and I have my own feelings about things. But like anybody, you don't know how well your own thoughts and your own emotions hold up unless you have somebody that you respect, you know what I mean, and someone whose opinion you value, unless you have somebody to put that up against. And I think for me, like, Lena was at one point one of those people in my lives. And I think she could really put me on my heels and make me...
It's a very brilliant person, too.
Yeah.
And it has
like,
all
on point,
and also has a lot of, like, at her fingertips, these references that you can pull out, which is, like, makes it hard to, you know.
And, like, for me, those are the friendships and relationships, kind of friendships and relationships that I value the most in life. The ones that are, you know, like, I appreciate you, I respect you, but I also don't agree with you on everything. So we can challenge each other, and that's how I grow as a person. And I think we ended up having a rift where, you know, we haven't been in touch in quite some time, and we left off on not such good terms because of our continuing disagreements.
Right.
But that doesn't make me, you know, if you hear this, Lena, shout out. You know what I mean? I got nothing but love and, like, respect. But I think with her also at the time, her putting out that book, and she's a journalist, you know, that's her career, she gets a lot more backlash.
Sure.
And a lot more, you know what I mean? She gets a lot more strife. You know what I mean? And I think I can't speak for her, but this was my interpretation. Whereas maybe she was looking for a little bit more camaraderie and allyship from me. I think the idea that more often than not, I would tend to play devil's advocate in our conversations, or, you know what I mean? There were things that we agreed on, and there were things that we definitely didn't agree on. And I think over time, that became a little bit more of a strain than she intended for our interaction or our friendship to ever really be, which is, I think, what created, you know, the rift to some extent, which is unfortunate, but I definitely think it was worthwhile.
Yeah.
I like the conversations that I had with her and our interactions were worthwhile as far as updating and informing and challenging my own opinions, which I always welcome, which I think is the best way to be.
Yeah, because that's that discussion and like disagreeing with people, and you have to adapt your own worldview to maybe understand what they're doing, and ultimately you grow as a person by doing that.
Yeah.
So it's all positive things.
Right.
Now, one of the things about Lena being a journalist and being a good journalist versus some of the worst examples of yellow journalism that I've seen in the modern.
Oh, wait, you got to clarify yellow journalism. What do you mean by that? Because someone will jump on you about that.
But I mean,
out of context, yeah.
Yeah, yellow journalism is a clearly defined term, though. And like,
yeah,
you know, I mean, I'm referring to basically blowing something.
I'm kidding, by the way.
Yeah.
I know what he means, but I'm saying for anybody listening.
Yeah. Well, how would someone take that the wrong way?
Who knows nowadays?
Okay. All right.
That's all I'm saying.
What I'm talking about is like blowing something out of proportion.
There you go.
And maybe fabricating some stuff in order to sell papers, because this came to light during like the McCarthy era and all that sort of stuff.
Gotcha.
So I mean, what's been really out of hand right now, I think, is just the heavy metal media, or whatever you want to call it. It seems to be on this kind of witch hunt with extreme music and like outing people
and outing bands.
Yeah, and specifically Metalsucks, that webzine.
Okay,
web magazine,
and like taking them to task.
Yeah,
so to speak.
And the funniest part about it is all of this information, all these big scoops they have on people, is actually at least 10 years old for the most part.
Or a couple of years old.
Well, yeah, Destroyer 666, that was like a couple of years ago, I think, right?
Yeah, like probably like 2 years ago. And here's the thing, with that guy, even with that band, there's certain stuff that, to an extent, if I don't know where you stand and it seems vague, I'm just like, I don't need to fuck with you. Like, I don't need to see that show. Like, you ain't Mayhem. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I don't really care. There's not enough historical context for me to, like, care about seeing your band. And with that particular band, it's like, do I think that guy's a full-blown Nazi?
Well, there was some, like, sexist shit with him, too.
Oh, yeah. Dude, there was sexist shit. There was homophobic shit. There was all sorts of shit. Right, now, here's the thing. I grew up in like underground hip hop also, which has all the misogyny and sexism and like, to an extent, homophobia to an extent, you know what I mean? Like, that you can imagine, but there's a generational context to some of those sort of things. So with a band like Destroyer 666, I tend to draw the line on like, where you're like flirting with Nazism a little bit too much for my comfort. And okay, like I read the different posts and, you know, his responses to those things. And at the end of the day, I just decided, you know what, some of this is just a little bit too much for me. I don't necessarily need to condemn it. Like, it wasn't so bad that I felt the need to like, no, I got to speak up about this.
No.
So I didn't say shit, and I just decided I'm going to keep it moving.
I let that one roll, but also one of the things, though, is like, it was the promoter who decided that he didn't want him to play. Right.
Okay.
And so my thing, though, is like, okay, that's great. I think that's cool that somebody was like, okay, I'm tired of all these guys, you know, the patriarchy, you know, whatever. But like, you have to apply that across the board to every show. Like, I don't want to see this guy book like, you know, whatever, some booty hip hop show or whatever. And, you know, or if you want to talk about sexism and homophobia, did any people have Bad Brains records?
There you go.
You know what I'm trying to say?
There
It's
you
like,
go. Yeah.
do you have a...
Okay, so does HR need to go in a corner for the rest of his life?
He can't
and we never need to hear from him again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you own, any outlaw country records? Do you have, like, any Jerry Lee Lewis records? You got R. Kelly music? You know?
I think with certain artists, depending on what they did and the context and their explanation, there's enough if you listen to, like, any form of extreme music, whether it's hardcore hip-hop or whether it's extreme metal, there are things that you kind of have to, like, make a psychological almost bargain with yourself that these are the things that I'm going to acknowledge and I'm going to be aware of, I'm going to try to put into a certain context, and here's what I want to enjoy about it. Because it's not all good or all bad. And you kind of got to decide to yourself how much of it is worth me feeling like this is tolerable and this is endurable, and here's what I don't necessarily fully agree with, and where do you draw the line on your own personal, individual basis.
And at the end of the day, with all this stuff, it's like I have to ask Metalsucks, like, what the fuck do you expect, really, man? Yeah. It's like you're gonna, like, black metal, since the second wave of black metal, since the early 90s, like 93 or 90 or
what
whatever.
did you think you were
like,
getting
what do you think these guys were doing? It's like these guys,
they started out burning churches and murdering
each other.
Yeah.
It's like
it was, that's the thing I sort of loved about black metal. At the time, it was the closest thing to fucking gangster rap that there was in heavy music.
I agree with you.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it was gangster back in the day. Like, I was fascinated by it.
So, I mean, either you gotta have to understand sort of the vernacular of, like,
of where it came from.
Yeah, man. It's like, and I'm not saying that, I mean, that culture is so far removed from, like, anything that I deal with on a daily basis.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like the same way that, I can listen to, NWA or the Ghetto Boys because I don't live that life.
And you appreciate the art and the music of it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
I appreciate where the creative statement comes from.
And also, if you listen to whatever form of black metal or whatever form of hip-hop that you listen to that you feel like is completely aligned with your moral ideas, you have to realize that those artists that you listen to now were at some point influenced by the things that you would like to condemn and the things that you would like to, do away with from back in the day. Pick a rapper that you listen to now that you feel like is, like, Common. You know what I mean? Let's say you like listening to Common, who's, like, he's sort of a safer hip-hop artist. If you listen to Common, you can't then go condemn NWA or condemn Snoop Dogg or condemn whatever other hip-hop artists back in the day because they influenced the guy that you like now.
Exactly. That's a very good point about it.
You know what I mean? There's a context to where all of this stuff, came from. And you can't you have to, if you're going to enjoy what you like about it, you have to sort of come to terms with the context of where it's rooted from.
I agree.
And that's like everything in society to some extent.
I mean, that's a very, very astute observation of this whole thing, I think, because it's so true, man. It's like, where do you draw the line with any of these things? Okay, all right. Now, because Mike Hill said the Bad Brains are homophobes, so I'm not going to listen to Bad Brains.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So are you going to listen to, are you going to listen to In Living Color? Are you going to listen, or like a Living Color? Are you going to listen to Prong, who's like very influenced by the Bad Brains?
Right, exactly.
Are you going to listen to, you're not going to listen to them because they're influenced by the Bad Brains, and the Bad Brains have this.
Any metal band that you love, any band. Yeah. We all grew up on Slade.
Are you going to throw away your Motley Crue records because of the misogyny that happened with Motley Crue? I mean, it's like, it's that statement again, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, once you start, like...
And you also, I think you have to give... I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
No, I really don't want you to say
You have to give people the opportunity and context to explain themselves. You know what I mean? And, again, in my own life, because, I grew up... Again, I'm black and I'm disabled. Like I said, I have CP. I grew up at a time in the 90s, you know what I mean? Like when I was coming of age, where there were no safe spaces. People said and they did what the fuck they wanted to some extent. And it wasn't good for me to have some of the things happened that did to me growing up, but it definitely helped reinforce my spine to, you know what I mean, and my own logic and self-defenses and my own like just willpower to a certain extent,
Totally.
to get through the world, you know what I mean. And I sort of, at a certain point growing up, and again, the neighborhood that I lived in, I was bused like 25 minutes away to a suburb in Queens that was almost completely like white and Asian kids. And then during the summer, I went to like summer camp in Bushwick in the 90s when shit was real. Like that's where I saw my first like knives, guns, and drugs. These were like 12-year-old kids that were packing.
Jesus,
man. You know what I mean? It was wild shit back in the day. So it's like at a certain point, I had to sort of reconcile with the idea that like, look, the world's not a friendly place for the most part. You see the good and worst in people when they're like black and disabled growing up. You see the best and you see the worst in people. So at a certain extent, and it made me very, it went from making me very defensive to being very aggressive. Like growing up, like I went from being like a kid that got picked on and bullied to becoming very defensive and then getting really like aggressive, like swing first, fucking ask questions later, whatever it's going to be. And at a certain point, once I started to calm down, I had to sort of make a deal with myself that like, look, before I decide to be reactionary, I want to try to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe this person isn't intending to come off at me the way I'm interpreting it, or even dealing with like race relations. If I wanted to, I could have went through life feeling like this and that person is racist, they're prejudiced, they've got something against me, and it would have been constant and endless.
Yeah.
Because there's opportunity to make that interpretation the way you're programmed to wherever you go. Wherever you go, there's an opportunity to look at something and go, this is against me.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I had to make a bargain with myself that I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Even if I think that whatever they're doing is still what they're doing, I want to give myself the opportunity to like, let me look at it from another angle. Let me try to feel it out from another angle other than what my gut feeling and what my instinct and my intuition. Still, you should depend on those things. You should depend on your gut feeling and your intuition and your the subtext and the substrates of what you think is happening.
Yeah.
But I try to initially react on benefit of the doubt and let me see where this is going first, because going through life in an immediately reactionary way was getting me nothing but fucking brick walls and conflict.
Well, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about like data chunking and just sort of pattern recognition and like being a fucking hominid, out in the, walking through the savannas of the ancient world, where it's like, we had the reason why we survived as a species is because we were able to associate all these things, and that's for survival. But then as societies got more and more complicated, that turned into like, racism, prejudices, and all these other things, because you can check off that's out of like 10 factors.
Yeah.
If I got 5 of them, that it's this thing. Instead of like going through 6 through 10 and using that to give some sort of overtone to what you're actually observing,
Yeah, even with like race relations in America, right? Growing up in the different within metal and within hip hop, I sort of started to like zero in on the fact that I don't think that everyone who necessarily has racial issues, unresolved racial issues, is, like a full-blown actual racist.
I was thinking about that myself.
And those are the people, like, if someone is willing to talk and try to work it out, not that you're going to, most people that you come across, you can't change their mind. Right? But the one thing that you can do is try to interact with them if they're willing. And not that you're necessarily going to change their mind, but you at least leave them open to interacting and communicating with the next person, rather than you being the one to shut them off from feeling like they have a place to speak their mind. You know what I mean? And yeah, indeed, there are straight up like full-blown racists. I'm under no misconception about that.
But there's a difference, though, between like
having unresolved racial issues and being like a full-blown racist asshole.
I mean, you know, my people, my family. Yeah, you know, it's like I have family members. Like,
we all have.
Grew up in the Bronx. They're old school. You know, they have like, you know, they've said a lot of off-color things here and there. But they also are the same people who like I've come to my house and my parents' house with people of color, and they're cool.
Right. And here's the other thing.
But that doesn't make that, even though they might have unresolved racial issues, that doesn't mean they're part of the American Nazi Party or the National Socialist Movement.
Yeah, and I think also, this is a weird thing. I've also discovered that, like, I think this comes also from, like, growing up around different areas of Queens. I think there are certain people out there, a lot of them, who, on an individual basis, they don't have problems or prejudices against individuals.
Right.
But when it comes to the group, whatever group that is or whatever race that is as a whole, that's where you see, you know, with different people that I've known in the past, and even like a couple of people that I know right now, on an individual basis, I've seen them interact with all kinds of people, and they're totally cool, and they're totally comfortable, and they're inviting and welcoming, and, you know, civilized.
Yeah.
But when it comes to their thoughts about a certain group as a whole, shit gets a little sketchy, shit gets a little weird, and if you catch them, shit can be overted at the time, and that's where you gotta, like, check them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And try to, like, bring them back down to, like, earth. And you're not gonna be able to, like, save everybody, but I don't think we're serving, you know, the overall society by condemning those people and getting them fired and, you know what I mean, going out of your way to like completely shun them.
Yeah, I mean that just brings more of a
animosity
and animosity.
Yeah, it just feeds the animosity. And again, I'm not trying to save every you know, asshole.
Sure, there are tons of assholes.
Yeah, I'm not trying to save every asshole that has like disagreeable opinions that I don't fuck with.
Yeah.
But like depending on who you know and how long you've known that person in the context, again, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I also try to look at things from more angles than just like, yo, that's what you think, that's how you feel, this is who you are. You know, because like I've recently been deemed. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say one other thing, and like something very ironic too about these like extreme metal shows, like black metal. You know, I've seen you at many shows. You know, we've seen each other. How diverse is an actual black metal show? When you go to St. Vitus, it's like, I would say it's like 50-50, man. You know, there's like...
It's getting there.
Yeah, it's like...
There's a lot more diversity than when I first started going.
I mean, you know, we toured with 1349 and Code Horror and all these, you know, Creator and all these bands, and like we all through like the Southwest, and it's like all Mexican people, man. It's like it's not really a lot of white people.
I first got put on the Cradle of Filth from like Mexicans that I went to like high school and like junior high school with. Like they love black metal, they love death metal.
Now
you know what I mean?
The whitest show I've ever been to has not been a metal show. It was Sigur Rós.
Oh wow!
That band, that Icelandic band.
Yeah.
That was I went to that show, and that was like it was.
This is shockingly Caucasian.
It's shockingly Caucasian. Now the funny thing was, like, I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, there's like some white people here, man.
Yeah.
Like everyone was fucking white at the show.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting.
You know what's funny? A lot of that tends to be the case at most underground hip hop shows.
Is mostly white people?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's more of like an internet thing.
Huh. Okay.
You know what I mean? Like there was a certain time growing up in like underground hip hop where certain artists got known through download networks.
Okay.
This is like before the internet is what it is now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was mostly kids that were like either tape trading or that were sharing downloads or that were going through certain record stores. So I think, the awareness was more like suburban.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Or at least people that were like tuned into, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but that are a little bit more tuned into technology at the time. Okay. So if you go to like most cities around America with like the underground hip hop artists that I listen to, even the black ones, like you think of a guy like Sean Price, who's like born and raised in Brownsville, who's like, when you want to talk about like urban hardcore hip hop music, he's like the gold standard. I'd say about 90% or 85% of his audience was like, again, like, you know, shockingly Caucasian when you go to his shows. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I think because, well, depending on the rapper, the artists that were on more mainstream labels, like, you know, whether it's Jay-Z or DMX or whatever, those audiences tend to be, you know, more like, you know, black people going to those kind of shows. But once you got to the underground and you got to where like the mainstream support wasn't there and the media was a little bit more word of mouth, it's most of those people, whether they were black hip hop artists or white or Spanish underground hip hop artists, they were mostly supported by like white fans. Like it's a weird, interesting thing. Man. Yeah, it really is.
Because I mean, you know a lot from Dialect. That dude.
Okay, yeah.
He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
Like, I went up to visit his studio last summer, and he was like turning me on to like a bunch of music.
Yeah.
He was telling me about how like he's like, these kids don't care about records, or their shit's like they're not MP3s. It's all about YouTube.
Yeah.
Like everyone's into just having their shit out there.
Yeah.
And people seeing it on YouTube. Mm-hmm. That's like the big platform for any of this, like
it's our MTV.
Yeah, it's like any of this like underground, like R&B and hip hop and all this other stuff that he that's actually what he works on mostly these days. Is, you know, he's up in Harlem,
engineering and
producing, doing beats and all this other stuff. So he's in that scene, like deep, you know. So like he was telling me, they don't give a fuck about records, tapes. Right. They don't care about cassettes or anything. It's like it's all just getting their shit online and having like anything you watch on your phone. That's it.
Right.
It's all mobile technology type stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I would love for like, I don't know if there are any like scientists or researchers out there to figure out like why that sort of happened in underground hip hop, with why like the audience, because in the 90s it was much more integrated and urban. Then as hip hop got bigger and bigger and bigger in the mainstream and the underground became a little bit more subversive, the audiences went from being like mostly black to like mixed to like predominantly white kids going to see like urban hip hop artists. Like it's a weird thing. But again, and even at those kind of shows, there are incidences where it's like, okay, this person is a part of the culture. They obviously appreciate it. They come out to support it. They spend their money on it. And every now and again, you'll catch somebody saying something weird or like, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? You know what I mean? About this thing that you're obviously dedicated to. It's almost like you have an appreciation for the artistry, but then you have unresolved issues about, you know, the people that it comes from.
Yeah, it's complicated, right?
It's complicated.
And it goes back to what I'm saying, all these like fucking overtones and shit. It's
right.
Like no one wants to acknowledge it.
It's complicated. And that's why I'm not opposed to saying this person's a racist.
Sure.
But I try to give people as much leeway as possible before I go, okay, you're that, I'm not fucking with you anymore.
But there is a difference between what you're saying.
Being racially conflicted and being racist.
Oh, and another level of being racially conflicted or racist or organizing some fucking hate group.
Exactly.
Like that's like,
There's levels to this.
There's levels even to this. You know what I'm saying?
There's a context to all of it. Or for example, recently on like Facebook, you know what I mean? Oh, so in the past maybe year and a half, 2 years, I've been trying to integrate and wrap my head around things that are not necessarily in my ballpark. Mm-hmm. Like whether it's, you know, transgender issues or different things that other kinds of people with other kinds of disabilities deal with. Because even though I have a disability, for the most part, like I walk.
Yeah.
Like I get around on my feet.
You're out and about. Yeah.
I'm out and about. I'm on my feet.
Sure.
And there are segments, I guess, of that community that have just, my eyes have never really been opened to it. Because I'm just out there living my life. I don't really pay attention. I'm just doing my thing. And so when it comes to like, you know, disability issues or transgender issues or whatever issues that I keep seeing pop up, you know what I mean, in my news feed that I wasn't paying that much attention to before, that weren't on my radar, I've been trying to like integrate myself into those sort of like online communities to sort of try to wrap my head around things and educate myself to some extent. And like maybe about a month ago, it was a weird Facebook group. It sort of intermingled between people that were like BTQ, I don't know all the initials in the right order. I apologize. And people that had like disabilities, people that were from both segments of those that intermingled in this one group. And I'd just been reading about different things and trying to, again, wrap my head around it. And something occurred to me. I don't know if anybody listening has ever heard of, I think it's called the body integrity identity disorder. These are people that want to purposely become disabled.
Wow.
Right. Wrap your head around that shit.
Damn.
So here's the thing. Either by means of like amputation or by another form of surgery, they want to use a wheelchair or they want to get rid of a limb. They either want to partially paralyze themselves or they want to remove a limb. They don't like their right arm. They don't like the toes on their left foot. They don't, whatever it is that they want to get rid of an ear. You know what I mean? So they want to like intentionally disable themselves. And bear with me, because I didn't think about how I asked this question, because I'm not approaching it from I don't think I'm approaching it from any viewpoint of like hatred. It's a natural curiosity that I had. In the group, the way I think I worded the question was, do you think, or could there be any correlation between the inclinations of, transgender people and people that have body integrity disorder? What I meant by that was transgender people want to go through their, procedures and operations to, make their bodies, appear and feel, be what they imagine.
Yeah.
Be what they want.
Yeah.
They want to make that alteration.
Sure.
You know what I mean? The same way, I do body suspension. There are plenty of people in the body mod community that, get implants or that get, carvings, brands, all kinds of things.
All that stuff. Yeah.
So, I can understand wanting to alter your body however you want to do it. And even if I think it's, no matter how strange I think it is or how unusual I think it is, I'm all for you doing whatever you want to do to your body.
So you were just questioning, like,
I was just questioning,
right. You weren't judging anybody for it.
I wasn't judging. Yeah. I was just trying to ask, like, okay, transgender people want to make these alterations to their body, and then people with body integrity disorder want to make these particular alterations to their body. Is there any sort of psychological synapse or connection between the impulse, even though what they're doing, whether it's your genitalia that you're trying to alter, or whether it's a limb that you're trying to, or your mobility that you're trying to alter, could there be any synapse of a correlation between the inclination to do so? Does that make sense the way I'm wording it?
That makes sense.
I want to be very clear about how I'm saying this.
That's an interesting question
into
to
the
ask,
microphone.
for sure.
And I posted the question, and then I think within a half hour, I was like removed and blocked from the group.
Well, there's that thing we were talking about.
Right. So then another friend of mine who was in the group, I was like, what happened? Like, I'm not in the group anymore. And I'm like, can you try to add me back? And they did. And they're like, no, you're blocked, dude. And I was like, can you like actually admin why? And the response that she got was that the question was extremely problematic and that it was transphobic to, conflate that there could be any comparison between the two. And I'm not like, I understand that they're two completely different things that people are trying to do to their physical alterations.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, is there any sort of...
I mean, I think it's a fair question.
I think it's right. I thought it was a fair question. I was immediately branded as being transphobic.
Yeah, well, see, now
the question was transphobic.
But now this is another really big item that we're coming upon too. It's like, you ever read 1984 with like Newspeak? And compelled speech. And what that did was removed all subtlety from language. Context. All that stuff's gone.
Context is irrelevant.
Everything has been reduced to these words.
This is what you said. This is what I say you meant. This is what I say you meant by what you said.
Yeah, and that's the world we're moving towards. I feel like unless someone puts a stop to this, where okay, that word, it's like it comes up on some fucking net somewhere. It gets caught in a net.
Yeah.
And now, okay, well, we caught you saying this word. Mm-hmm. So now you're
this, you're that. You're in trouble.
You're trouble.
You
now.
fucked up.
Yeah.
You're problematic.
Yes, exactly. And that's rather than opening up some kind of fucking discussion about it. Right. You know, like a trap door opens up and you disappear and get sent to hell.
Right.
You know?
Like just like in the group, literally, I asked a question. Then no one even responded to me.
Yeah, they just blocked you.
They just blocked me.
Yeah.
I was like, and here's the thing, and I caught myself having that moment, and this is why I'm very careful about who I accuse of being racist, because my immediately gut reaction was like, oh, word, that's how it is, and fuck y'all, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to hear shit about anything that, like, any of you have to say. Like, I don't care. Now, again, because I'm me, I catch myself having that moment, and, you know, I can't follow through with that gut reaction. I have to stop, pause, and adjust myself and go, what, you know, you're upset right now because you feel like you've been unjustly accused, right? But try to sort it out with someone else, even though you're blocked from that group. Whereas other people, they get banished, whether it's on social media or whether it's in real life, they get banished. They might take that same gut feeling that I had and go run with it for the rest of their lives.
Totally. Yeah.
And that's the dangerous thing about, like, you know, even like you see this thing in sports or you see this thing in like media where someone says the wrong thing and immediately everybody's calling for them to be fired and then for them to be banished. And, you know, what you said, depending on what you said, of course, there's certain things you can't. You just, you know, depending on what your job is. But there's no context to anything. You said it, you're out. You know what I mean? And I don't think that helps. Because, one, it's like, dude, what do you expect people not to be able to earn a living? Like, you want to take that away from them because they're a little ignorant or because they're a lot of ignorant? Like, what do you think they're going to do? Who do you think they're going to find to help support them if you banish them from society?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, for me, where I'm able to catch myself and I'm able to, like, readjust, and I went to other people that I could try to sort through, one, my dissatisfaction with, like, just being, you know, ousted like that from a group that I thought was very informative and I thought was interesting. I didn't agree with anything in it, but it was at least helping me try to wrap my head around some of those things. Yeah. And then I asked what I thought was a fair question, and now I'm out, and now I'm, like, aggravated, you know what I mean? Where other people, they take that sentiment of being aggravated and feeling unjustifiably ousted, and then they pass that on to their other friends. They pass it on to their kids.
Yeah, then it just reflects poorly on that community, too, because this one group. They chose to deal with you that way, you know what I mean?
And I'm not saying, like, you know, I'm not an innocent victim. I understand why people get upset about these certain things. But it's like, when did we get to the point where we don't even... Someone could have said, hey, what do you mean by that?
Yeah,
they just completely took, like, the dead statement and decided this is what I say you meant by that, and it's unacceptable, and out you go. Like, there's no way, and whether it's Facebook or real life, like this shit is happening, like, out in the actual world.
Oh, yeah.
Left and right, everywhere you go. You know what I mean?
There was, what the hell's the guy's name? His last name is Winstein.
Oh, Brett Weinstein.
Brett
oh,
Weinstein.
Yeah, at Evergreen College.
Yeah, you've seen all
This is another thing that, like, set me off, okay? Yeah. So this guy... His college, Evergreen, look it up. Brett Weinstein, Vice did like a piece on it.
Yeah.
Where him
and his wife too.
Yeah, him and his wife. Yeah. His college did like a day of absence, where to prove a point, all the black students that went to that college, they would take a day where they all wouldn't show up, as a way to say that, like, you know, always, you know, try to be aware of our plights, because imagine if, you know, if we all went away, how would you feel about that? How would that, you know, how would that affect society? How would that affect our school?
Like their absence.
Right. Which is totally reasonable.
Yeah, I see the point.
The flip side to that, what they then tried to do, this was like, they've been doing this day of absence thing for, like, I guess, like a decade or two.
Yeah, it's been
a long-running tradition.
Yeah,
so now the current new generation, what they then tried to do was the minority students tried to tell all the white kids at the school that, you know what, you guys shouldn't attend school that day, so that you know what I mean? In order to have our backs, to show that you're an allyship and that you support us, you shouldn't come to school that day, so that you know what it's like. And Brett's whole point is that I understand if you want to have your day of absence, and I support that, and I'm a part of it. And this guy, he had a track record of defending civil rights issues throughout his life when it wasn't beneficial to him at all.
Yeah, he's a known social justice proponent.
Exactly.
He's Jewish.
And so his whole thing was like, it's kind of inherently racist. I hate to use a term like reverse racism, because that's taken on so many different meanings that are hard to refine. But it's like imposing the flip side of what you guys are doing it's not the same. To tell one group of people that they shouldn't come to school one day to show their support for you is not the same as you choosing to not come to school.
Yeah.
And just because you're inverting the situation does not mean that it's the same
the
connotation.
not the same, yeah.
The sentiment is not the same.
Yeah.
And when he spoke up about that, very many people tried to brand him as like a patriarchal, white cis male racist, or
they called him a Nazi. Actually,
now he's a Nazi,
yeah.
And it's like that's the kind of thing that, again,
they threatened him with.
If I would have been going to Evergreen at this time, I would have been one of the people to go, wait, hold on, no, I actually know what he means, and I know the point that he's making, and I think you guys are misconstruing what he's trying to say.
But then you would be
But then I
Nazi.
would then be outcasted and be branded as like a race traitor.
Yeah, or a Nazi.
Or a Nazi. Yeah, I'm a race trading Nazi.
Yep.
Right. So that's another one of these things where it's like, where are we going with all this? You know what I mean? Like,
and he was threatened with violence too.
Yeah. No, they also
people
said
are like losing their mind.
This whole thing of like your views and what you say is that was one of the things that they showed on Vice. What he's saying is violence. His opinions are violent. And again, this comes back to me growing up the way I did. Not to say the way I grew up is the best way to be, but it's like there was a very clear distinction of when people, there's a very clear distinction. Okay, we're having a disagreement, but we're still talking.
Yeah, totally.
And it's not violent until you get up in my face.
Yeah, you're actually putting your hands on somebody.
Right, and now kids nowadays, they have this notion that because they feel like their feelings are being assaulted, that it's actually the same as violence. Like, assault is not insult. And unless you're advocating for someone to hit me, or unless you're telling me that you're going to come over here and punch me in the face, is not the same. And I think that sentiment is lost on so many in the youth culture, and also, people that are contemporaries of us, that are our age. It's such a weird thing. And for the longest time, I was sort of just like keeping to myself and ignoring all of it, and just trying to I don't get it, but I don't want to ruffle the waves or whatever. Like, I don't want to make any waves. But then that starts to fester. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, if you don't address it, if you don't get it out there, it comes out the wrong way at the wrong time. Totally. Which luckily hasn't happened to me. But when you suppress people's interaction, then it comes out distorted, and then it comes out in poisonous,
Well, yeah, it's like that just even in your personal life, man. If you're,
if you have family members that you don't get along with, and you don't address it,
you just bite your tongue,
and it's gonna come out at the wrong moment for something.
The family, like Thanksgiving dinner, you get a couple of drinks in you, and you shoot your mouth off,
and someone says something that was a level 2 on the scale of level 10, and you smash an ant with the sledgehammer.
Yeah, you just blow up at everyone, and
then you look like the asshole.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, you guys misunderstood me, Yeah, it's like, and that's what this is all about. Really,
Yeah. Or I mean, did we even get into the thing about communism yet? Did we discuss that on here?
We talked about that when
we first started.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's just like it all sort of in the effort for more fairness and more equality and more inclusion. I find that the actual opposite is happening in so many areas. And don't get me wrong, I completely support the notion that there's always room for improvement, and there's always, we should always be striving to make things better for whoever, within reason. And I appreciate the sentiment that the youth culture has in these improvements, but there needs to remain a context for one, giving people the benefit of the doubt, and two, more importantly, be willing to have that discussion and not just shut it down and not just make it go away. That doesn't help.
Well, you mentioned that you've been seeing this hammer and sickle iconography popping up here and there. So
right.
So
here's the thing. All right. In theory, I see why people in theory. Give me a second. Sorry. In theory, I see why people think communism is a good idea, because the notions and the goals of it are to make things fair so that everybody can have, what they need, each according to his own, or each according to his own ability. I get that, right. But there are plenty of theories that sound great, but that in practice have proven over time, again and again, to be disastrous. And so when it comes to the younger generation being drawn to communism, I get it to an extent. And so far I've only really seen it on social media, like people that are posting hammer and sickle.
Right.
And
which is really a complicated symbol too, if you think about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you think about Stalin and
right, Mao.
Yeah,
what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's when it comes to communism, right now we're in Gravesend, which is only 15, 20 minutes from Brighton Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And if you understand anything about Brighton Beach, it's probably the primary neighborhood in New York City where people that immigrated from the Soviet Union came, to America to get away from communism. You know what I mean? And they didn't all just pick up and leave, because things were going so well.
Yeah.
There's a reason, you know what I mean? And so when it comes to, one, the body count on communism is far exceeding the Holocaust or any other recent...
Well, I mean, even just the body count of Jewish people killed, destroyed is, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I mean, Stalin was just as...
I think Hitler was somewhere around 17, 20 million on the total. You know what I mean? Overall, as far as the war and everybody in each nation that the Nazis ended up being accountable for as far as their death toll.
Yeah.
But Stalin, there's no succinct number even, or Mao. It's beyond what's calculable. You know what I mean? According to the record books of how many people died. So for me, having a context of knowing Brighton Beach and knowing, different places around the world and people that came here to get away from communism, and my uncle, you know what I mean, who grew up around in different countries, he schooled me on that very young. Because I had, you start to learn about it in school and you're reading it and you're like, oh, these seem like good ideas. What's so wrong with it? Until he goes, well, this happened there, China, Korea, Singapore. You know what I mean?
But it's more of the human, ego and hubris that steps in and corrupts these ideas. Really.
Yeah. Right. Of course. But again, if something that has a good intention gets corrupted, every place that it was attempted to be implemented, at what point do you draw the line? So for me, anytime I see the hammer and sickle, I'm like, I don't understand why that doesn't get as much of a bad rap as a swastika does, to some extent, considering the damage that it's done. And again, I'm going to preface what I'm saying with, I may be, half wrong about what I'm saying right now, but I'm just trying to put my thoughts out there so that this conversation can happen with others in a greater context. I don't understand people, either knowingly or or not fully educated, throwing out that kind of imagery and throwing out that kind of ideology without fully grasping like the horrors that it caused around the world. I mean, I just got into an argument for the first, it's quite fitting, I got into an argument for the first time ever on Facebook about communism, you know what I mean, as opposed to capitalism. And again, I mean, capitalism doesn't work ideally, but compared to everything else that's been tried so far, it's not as genocidal. So.
I mean, it's definitely got its issues, though.
Oh, yeah, 100%. You know, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, like living in this, like, especially here in New York City, like one of those greed-oriented capitalist places on the planet.
But again, we have to recognize that right now you're recording this on a Mac laptop, and we're speaking into microphones, and you know what I mean? These are innovations that we have access to because of capitalism.
Yeah, the competitive nature of
and innovation,
innovation
of it.
And all that,
and that comes at a price. Now, I don't want to say that all those prices are worthwhile, because some of them are very unjustly detrimental. You know what I mean? As far as the benefit and detriment that we get and that we trade for, you know what I mean, our amenities, you know, and living in a Western civilization, you know, we live fairly comfortable lives for the most part. And it's part of the system that as comfortable as we get to live because of the way the system works. Many other people, you know, suffer under the system that we benefit from. But I don't think communism, I don't have the answers for how to fix capitalism, but I definitely don't think communism is a better replacement at the time.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's. I don't think the form of government or economic system that does work has been developed yet.
Yeah. We're still trying to figure that out. And again, I think by blaming all our ills on, you know, hierarchy and patriarchy and capitalism, we're not really addressing fully what the other factors could be or probably are. Not to say that any of those things that I just mentioned aren't relevant, because they 100% are.
Well, one of the things I think needs to be considered is, like, you know, you mentioned patriarchy and all that. You know, I feel like the assumption that men have the answer to everything is probably one of the places that we go wrong as a society.
Oh, we definitely don't.
Because I mean, I know one of my experiences in Finland. Actually, sorry, Denmark, is. That country is basically run by women, sort of. Like, a lot of the big decisions are government, and, you know, we played this festival there, and the festival was run by women, and the whole thing went smoothly. Yeah. And I'm not saying that, like, that's the answer, just turn everything over to women, but I think that what has to be acknowledged is that men and women are both have strengths and weaknesses, and that the society needs to be looked at in those terms as how we can work together to sort of capitalize on each other's strengths. Yeah. You know, and that definitely getting away from having a patriarchal society, but having something that's more integrated, especially living in a more complex society that we live in right now.
Of course, yeah.
You know, and I think that might be one thing to think about.
We can't society doesn't work without each other and without us regulating, you know what I mean? Regulating each other. So, and this also goes to, like, the whole thing of, like, don't blame it all on patriarchy, the same way I don't want to blame it all on white guilt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Man. Like, and I also think that, like, that's such an... How much are you responsible for the things that your ancestors did?
I mean...
Right.
Most of my ancestors weren't even in the country around that time.
Right, exactly.
I mean, like,
so I say that...
I would say all of my ancestors. Yeah. Either the Irish or the Italians. I say that to say... I try to deal... I don't think it... Sure, you may benefit from these things that, you know, whether you're white, whether you're male, whether you're whatever, of course you may benefit from these things unfairly, but are you going out of your way to, like, oppress other people as an individual? I don't think so. You know what I mean? And I don't think it's fair to, like, take, you know, certain things like that
and blame it all. Not even blame it all. I think you have to address people as individuals on an individual level, because the second you label somebody as, being a part of something that you blame whatever you identify their group as, one, they don't hear you anymore. They stop listening, and then it just becomes about defending themselves. So that at that point, you're no longer having an interactive conversation. It's just like, you're casting this label on me, and now I'm just going to try to defend myself against that label, and now you're no longer having an interactive communication.
But also the simplifying it to being like, white, black, Latin. It's like, okay, well, even within, say...
How far are we going to take that?
Like, if you go even within those different cultures,
right,
there's all sorts of, like, suppressions that go on within
there's short,
those cultures.
There's tall, there's fat, there's ugly, attractive. How far are you going to play that game?
Yeah.
And then eventually, and here's the thing, this is what, Western civilization figured out. The impetus and the onus for responsibility is on the individual. Individual to individual, that person has to take responsibility for themselves and conduct themselves accordingly to how they, you know what I mean?
Well, that's
how they want to interact.
That's what I've been preaching.
Right, and I think holding
time.
someone accountable to themselves is the best way to go about it, because it's like, okay, if you ask me about, we get into the whole like gun thing, and a lot of times people will go, all you people are upset about like gun violence, but no one wants to talk about like black on black crime and all that gun violence. And then I go, wait a minute, there's black on black crime and there's gun violence and in the hood, but me as another black guy who has family or cousins or friends in different hoods around New York City, am I supposed to go to their block and go, what up guys, what's up with all this black? I'm not responsible for their fucking black on black gun violence. You know what I mean? Nor do I hold you responsible for you to go from one white man to the other and go, what are you guys doing? You have to deal with people and their responsibility on an individual level.
Yeah, I mean, like the gun violence thing is different, completely different in both cultures. Really, it's like, I'll talk about the white perspective since I'm a white guy, but it's like this whole thing about people shooting up schools and all that stuff. I feel like the fact that we're discussing guns is a distraction to what's actually the problem with this shit. It's like these kids are all fucking pharmaceutical drugs, man. All these kids are like, their parents put them on pharmaceuticals because my kid's running around. He thinks he's Ted Nugent. He's jumping up, going nuts.
Yeah,
it's
put him on Prozac.
Put him on Prozac. It's like, all right, well, that has a side effect, man. And like, there are people that I know in the periphery of my life that have like, one woman I know went through a divorce, okay? And her doctor, her therapist put her on some sort of like SSRI or whatever, and then she started developing suicidal thoughts, okay? But the reality is like, okay, if you're going through something like that, maybe you need to be sad for a while, If you're a kid, you're 14 years old, your life's intense, I got all this energy. I don't know. I feel weird, whatever. You need to feel that. You don't just put that person on drugs because they're experiencing what I've experienced when I was 14 years old, and countless 14-year-olds all the way back in history. That is the one thing that differs from what's gone on during my generation. People weren't shooting up schools because I don't think that the pharmaceutical reach was as deep as it was. As it is now. And
also the media wasn't, I don't think, as divisive and as vitriolic.
Yeah.
Because even, like the guy in Vegas. He wasn't a kid. Yep. He wasn't a teenager. That's a grown man. Just a successful, well-to-do, wealthy grown man decided to
he was a gambler, right? Wasn't he like a professional gambler?
Something like that. I mean, he was well off, though.
Yeah.
Went batshit and fucking started splattering people. So, again, it goes back to let's address all the things that it can be, and let's go by empirical data. Never mind opinions, because we all get to have our opinions. We need to try to let scientists, do their jobs and experts at this thing, empirical data, and then look at all the empirical data and try to approach it from each angle. You know what I mean? And at the end of the day, you know, whether it's a group of people that are on medicines or a group of people that, you know what I mean, or are racist or they're crazy or whatever their problem is, you need to try to, you know, place some personal responsibility and care on individuals, because I think that's how you, like, correct society. It's only through, I think, you can't correct society by thinking you're going to fix all groups. You know what I mean? You're only going to adjust society by, you know, helping and allowing an individual to take responsibility of themselves with the adjustments that, you know, family and friends and community and society, and to some extent the government can provide to help individuals get better. But this whole thing of, like, you're going to fix society by, like, fixing white men, or you're going to fix society by, like, fixing, you know what I mean, like black teenagers that can't stop shooting each other. It doesn't seem to work that way, by, like, thinking you're going to fix the group. It seems to work that, like, on an individual basis, that's how seems to me that that's how change can be implemented and adjusted in the best way.
No, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
And on that note, man, thanks for coming by.
Absolutely. Anytime. I hope we can do this again.
Nah, we should do a regular one.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm down.
Cool.
100%.
All right, thanks a lot, Kyle.
Absolutely.
And thanks out there for listening, and I'll see you guys soon.